What is up, my Nakama? So my name is Daniel and I'm a current third year medical student, and it's been a little bit since I've chatted in front of the camera, but basically in this video I wanted to share my experience with my first clinical rotation in medical school, which was neurology. So in our school, our neurology rotation is 4 weeks long and I finished it last week. This week I'm currently on our psychiatry rotation, but I'm coming out with a video about that later on. But for now, I wanted to share kind of what my experience was like and some insights I made during my first clinical rotation. So let's get started. So I don't really have a script for this video, so I'm kind of just gonna freeform this and go off the top of my head, but I feel like it'll be more natural that way anyways. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the transition from preclinical studying to clinical studying. And it's a lot different because during preclinical, basically your entire time is spent studying and you have no clinical responsibilities and you don't have to show up at the hospital. You don't have to show up like at 5 a.m. to pre-chart on patients and then you get out at 6 p.m., when you've met with your last patient. So it's a whole different type of mentality to have. And honestly, I struggled with it a lot during the first couple weeks. I was so used to how I studied in preclinical, like how I had four-hour Pomodoro blocks and I would do year-old questions. There is no time for that, because you're actually meeting patients and you're actually part of the care team. You're not exactly a physician yet, but you help with any duties that the residents need, you help with presentations, you help with writing notes, and you just help with taking care of the patients. And it's an awesome responsibility and opportunity to have, but it did kind of shift my mentality in how I approached studying. So one of the main things that I had to consider was how much time I was actually going to allocate to studying, because if I go to clinic from like 8 to 5, I'm pretty tired by the end of the day and I almost have like no energy to actually study. So any time during the day that I could find, like to do Anki cards or to do a few set of U-World questions, those were really valuable times, and weekends were extremely valuable too, because those were the times where I could actually get a set of like 40 uninterrupted questions in. And another thing that I had to do during my clinical rotations is like limit the amount of resources that I use. Because in preclinical, you had Boards and Beyond, you had Sketchy, you had Pathoma. So yeah, basically I just ended up having to limit the amount of resources that I use. And the two resources that I limited myself to were Anki and U-World. So I chose Anki because I am an Ankh prince. I'm not the Ankh king yet. I would never give myself that title. But I've been doing it for so long and I haven't even missed a day yet. I'm gonna hit that 2-year mark, honestly. 2 years of consecutive Anki days. That is just absolutely insane. But Anki has proven to be a useful tool for my step 1 studying, so I'm just going to continue it all the way until step 2 as well, and we'll see how that goes. And it's honestly really time efficient for me because I don't have to choose what I study. Anki just kind of spits it out for me as I unlock the cards. And there is like a step 2 deck, and I was lucky because I did the Zanki Anking step 1 deck, and there was already a bunch of step 2 cards in there. So actually the number of step 2 cards that I have to unsuspend is like 5,000 or 6,000 cards for the entire year, which is nothing compared to like the 30,000 cards that are for the step 1 deck. So I'm kind of well on my way to already having learned the material. And then the other thing I do is U-World. So obviously practice questions are super important in preparation for the shelf exam and for step 2, so U-World is just the gold standard for practice questions. And something else which is kind of really obvious, but I feel like I just didn't even think about, was you can just learn so much from actually being in clinic. So for example, when I was in neuro and I met a patient with like multiple sclerosis, for example, I would learn so much about multiple sclerosis before I met that patient, so that if the patient had any questions or if the attending was gonna ask me questions related to the patient's presentation, I would know everything about multiple sclerosis. And that type of studying that I did for each of my patients with their specific diseases actually really helped me on the shelf. And it just really helped me learn more about the patient as well. And if I didn't know a specific question, or if I didn't understand why patient was presenting in a certain way, I would ask those questions to my attending or to the residents, and based off of their answers, I'd really integrate that into my clinical knowledge base. And that just helped me like succeed in neuro and succeed in the shelf, and hopefully that's the type of knowledge that I'm going to retain going forward as a physician. And honestly, like compared to the stuff that I read in textbooks, like I learned so much more actually being in clinic and working with patients. Like it's a fantastic way of learning, actually being there, interviewing patients, performing a physical exam, and seeing like how certain diseases will manifest in terms of your physical exam findings. And it's just super awesome to like have been reading about all of this in a textbook and then to actually see it in practice in clinic. It's just a super cool feeling to apply 1.5 years of learning to actually like being a doctor. So yeah, I've definitely enjoyed that aspect overall. So besides studying, there's obviously been other parts of my life that have been difficult to manage ever since I started my clinical rotations. But I think that now that I've spent 4 weeks in neuro, I kind of have a grasp of like how my time management has to be. So I definitely, for the first week of neuro, somewhat sacrificed my exercise routine. It was difficult to maintain just because I was just getting used to being in this type of study schedule. To be honest, like I never had a strict like 8 to 5 or 6 to 6 job. I had only been studying my whole life. I've only been attending classes. So this was like the first time in my life that I actually had like a place to show up to and be at, and have dedicated work responsibilities. So it was somewhat, of a shift in that sense. But when I was trying to get used to that, like I definitely felt like I didn't have time to work out. And I was worried that I would never have time to work out. And I promised myself, like when I was going into medical school, that I would never sacrifice my health and that I'd always keep exercise as one of my top priorities, even above medical school. Even though medical school, it is very important to me and part of my career, my health and my mental health and physical health kind of come above medical school. So I don't really want to sacrifice time that I could be spending exercising, just to get in a few more study questions or just to be able to read up on more diseases. Because, if I'm not healthy, then I can't really treat my patients to the best of my ability. That's kind of the mindset that I approached that with. So kind of what I did was I didn't necessarily limit my exercise schedule, but I kind of shifted to working out from 5 days a week to doing more full body exercising 4 days a week and with an additional day of cardio. So even though I don't do like maybe splits anymore, like push-pull splits, I've sort of tailored my workouts to my schedule so that I can still get the same amount of volume that I've been getting, just condensed into 4 days instead of 5 days. And that's definitely worked well. I have gained a little bit of weight, but I plan on losing that hopefully. And I am coming out with that series called Medical School Calisthenics, which I'll link episode 1 here. But I'm trying to document this year's calisthenics journey and show you guys kind of the raw workouts and food that I'm eating in order to progress in calisthenics. It's actually been a while since I've talked to the camera like this, so I need some water breaks. But just some more information about neurology itself and some of the things I enjoyed. Well, one thing is that I think neurology has a physician shortage somewhat. I just remember we had 1 fellow and 2 residents for our entire neurology unit, and she was just saying how understaffed she felt. So I feel if you are really interested in neurology, as a specialty, you should definitely pursue it, because I think there is a huge need for neurologists all across the United States. And as people get older and as the average age in the United States gets older and older, you're going to be seeing a lot more neurological deficits present. Everything from movement disorders to strokes to Alzheimer's and dementia, other neurocognitive deficits, multiple sclerosis, just all things related to neuro. And it's definitely a very interesting field overall. I think there's a lot that we still don't understand about neuro, so it's still kind of a growing and evolving field, and there's a lot more research that is needed to be done in the field with regards to treatments and even with regards to like disease pathophysiology, because a lot of these diseases that are like autoimmune, we don't really know how they start or like what the inciting factors are. We just know that it's autoimmune. So there's a lot more research and innovation that can be done with neurology. And neurologists are generally like pretty smart people overall. Like every resident and attending that I had that was involved with neurology was super knowledgeable, not just about neurology, but kind of all aspects of medicine. Because to some extent your, nervous system does interact with every other organ system. So you kind of have to know a little bit about everything, but obviously your main focus is just the nervous system and those disease manifestations. In terms of the hours, I think it kind of depends on like whether you do outpatient and inpatient. So as a medical student, I was surprised, but the inpatient time was actually a lot better than the outpatient time. So for inpatient, you have to show up at 5 a.m., which sucks because you have to pre-round before your attending sees the patients. So if you're gonna round at 8, then you wanna make sure that you know your patient. So you show up around 5 or 6, you pre-round on your patients, and then you begin the rounds with your attending. But if you have only like 6 or 7 patients on the unit at the time, let's say, you could finish your rounds like at 11 or even 10. And then at that point on, like you kind of have the rest of the day to study, because mostly like the residents are doing like the actual orders and stuff, because we can't even do that as medical students. So it was nice because, if we finished all our work before lunchtime, then after lunchtime we had the rest of the day to study, which I definitely took advantage of during neuro. But for outpatient, even though the hours seem better, it seems like, you only have to work from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, whatever the hours are. You are working nonstop from 8 to 4, like if you have back-to-back patients. So there's like little time for breaks, and there's little time to do like kind of this mini studying in between patients. Like you will be seeing patients back-to-back, like with a lunch break, of course. And that can be, well, as a medical student, as a physician, it's nice. I feel like those hours, it's not 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. But as a medical student, if you're trying to get in other responsibilities, then it is a little bit difficult to do that during outpatient days. So you kind of have to, for those days, you just have to study outside a clinic, like either before you show up in the morning, which is a good idea if you're used to waking up at 5 a.m. and your clinic starts at 9, or you have to do your studying once you get back from clinic, which is super hard to do, and honestly something that I didn't do too much of. And to be honest, like the amount I studied was a lot less in this clinical rotation compared to how I studied in preclinical. And if you think about it, you don't really have to study as much as you did, because hopefully if you studied really hard for step 1, and if you were really focused and prepared during your actual preclinical neurology block, then you should be somewhat ready for all the material that's going to be covered in the shelf exam. Now, obviously, there's a few like more clinically related items that you have to know. Some of the things that you have to know that are really important for shelf, no matter what clinical rotation you're on, is like the order of events that you do. So for example, like if someone shows up to the ED and it's been less than 4.5 hours and they suffered a stroke, and on CT you ruled out that there was no acute hemorrhage, then you have to administer TPA, or tissue plasminogen activator, in order to like break up the clot that was causing the stroke, after you ruled out hemorrhage, of course, with CT. And it's kind of like those clinical things and the sequence of steps that you do for a certain disease presentation that is really important for the shelf exams, and something that's not really covered to some extent, or for step 1, I mean. So it's just things like that that were a little bit different on shelf. But otherwise, like most of the material, like I had actually somewhat covered every single disease that I had seen either in clinic or on the shelf exam while studying for step 1. So it's not like I was seeing anything radically new. And to some extent, like I feel like you don't have to study as much. If you are really focused during clinic, pay attention to all your patients, read up on your patients' diseases, then I feel like you'll cover at least 80% of what's going to be in the shelf. and then, you know, you can catch up like on the weekends or, you know, when you're cramming a few days before your shelf exam. And honestly, you'll do fine. And I ended up doing fine on my first neuro shelf exam. I felt like actually I had seen almost every single disease that was asked on our shelf exam, like actually in clinic with patients, which is kind of surprising because like I was reading online that you have to study additionally for shelf because there's no way that in like 4 weeks you're going to see every single possible disease in neurology. But honestly, we saw some pretty rare diseases while I was on my neurology block. You know, we saw some congenital neuro diseases. We saw some very rare autoimmune diseases. We saw some lysosomal like enzyme deficiency diseases like Gaucher, I think it was. Gaucher's, however you pronounce it. So yeah, very interesting stuff overall. But yeah, you know, never discredit what you're going to see in clinic, and always keep in mind that you can learn a lot in clinic, not just from your textbooks or from doing Anki. It's honestly might be your best resource, which is obvious, but I feel like, you know, a lot of people feel like they need other resources to study when the best resource is the patient right in front of you. But yeah, that's kind of just like a quick ramble about what my experience was like with neuro. I'm currently on psychiatry. This is actually, as I'm recording this video, tomorrow will be my second day. No, not second day. It'll be my second day of the second week of psychiatry. So I've already done 1 week of psych. And I feel like as I continue doing more clinical rotations, I'm getting better at them. And like I hit the ground running on day one, like because I had no idea like how to use Epic or like how to round or how to present. Like I looks like such a fool on neuro. Actually, quick story, but my very first presentation and the very first patient we saw was my patient on neuro, and I completely bombed the presentation. And like, I feel like the attending, like he took so much pity on me, but he actually kind of roasted me like while the presentation was happening. And then I was like sad for the whole entire time during rounds. But then like after rounds, like he came back up to me and said like, I know this is your first time, like just learn from this and you're going to do better. And, you know, by the end of the week, you know, I was flying with the residents in terms of my presentation, but it was definitely pretty funny. My first presentation of third year, like I had not presented on a patient since clinical skills, which is a course I took in preclinical. So it had been a really long time since I even interacted with people because I had just been locked up like in my room here studying for step 1. So that was definitely a funny experience that I'll never forget. But yeah, you know, I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave any comments below about third year of medical school in general, or just anything, honestly. I love reading all of your guys' comments, and I try and answer every single one of them. But yeah, hope you all, you know, you have a great day. Stay strong and stay healthy. And as always, Dattebayo.